Hey there, welcome to the channel. My name is James, and here at 20th and 21st Movies, we are about all things cinema. All right, I hope you are doing well wherever you are in the world and whatever time of the day it is that you're watching this video. I'm excited to come on here and share with you some thoughts on a recent release from Criterion on 4K Ultra HD, so another exciting 4K release. This is a film from director Charles Burnett from 1977, and it's part of his UCLA thesis, and it is called Killer of Sheep. This is the 4K edition of Killer of Sheep from the Criterion Collection. It comes in at spine number 1262. Now, this film has a release year of 1977, but Charles Burnett actually shot this film in 1972 and 73, and it took him some time, a few years, to pull the elements together and really make the film what he wanted it to be and getting it ready for an actual release and exhibition. So this is a film that has an incredible history, that is incredible to history as far as films go. And so I want to talk about this movie. I want to talk about how this looks on 4K Ultra HD and the supplements, and whether or not this is a title you ought to consider adding to your cart in the final days of the July Barnes & Noble sale. So I'm actually putting this video up with just a few days left in the sale, and so it gives you some time to watch this and think about, hey, do I want to add Killer of Sheep to my cart as part of the July sale, or any sale, or at all? Let's talk about it. All right, we're talking about Killer of Sheep, the film from Charles Burnett from 1977. I'm really excited to share some thoughts on this title because this is actually my second go around with this film, and I'll get more into that in just a few minutes in terms of my journey with this film and how I feel about this movie having visited it for the second time. Now, I have got some slides that I'm going to get into, but before I do, I want to talk a little bit about Charles Burnett, which I'll do that when I get to the slides. But Charles Burnett is not new to the Criterion Collection. Of course, this title, Killer of Sheep, is a new entry in the collection, but Charles Burnett first entered the collection with spine 963 in a film that stars Danny Glover. And this film was also written and directed by Charles Burnett. It's called To Sleep with Anger. This is definitely one I can recommend to you for sure. If you are wanting something a little bit different, this is a title that's probably not on many of your radars, and it's a title that I think you ought to definitely think about. It shows Danny Glover in a pretty menacing type of a character in this film as he, visits and preys upon this family. It's a very interesting film. It's a slow-burning masterwork from the early 1990s. So this is a film from 1990. It's 102 minutes. So definitely consider spine number 963. To Sleep with Anger, starring Danny Glover. So that's the first film from Charles Burnett to enter the collection. But today we're talking about Killer of Sheep. So I've got some slides on the wonderful MacBook Pro here that we're going to go through, and we're going to start off with my cover slide. Let's put it up. Killer of Sheep, Criterion Collection, Criterion 4K review. This is a landmark of American independent cinema. So this is, I think, one of the most important independent films of the 1970s. And as we go through this information, you'll understand a little bit more of why I'm saying that. But this is an absolutely phenomenal film. It's an American masterpiece, independent to the bone, radical truth-telling, says Manola Dargis of the New York Times. It recently got a 4K restoration that was exhibited, and I'll talk about how this film looks on the 4K disc that is in this edition. So great stuff there. Let's talk a little bit about this film. So this film was shot in Watts, Los Angeles in the early 1970s on 16 millimeters. So again, this was part of Charles Burnett's thesis. He was a UCLA student, and it's a genuine portrayal of Black working class life. This is something that was very important to Charles Burnett in an era where you had blaxploitation films, galore. And I like a lot of those blaxploitation films, and I think that he probably appreciated them as well. But he wanted to present a more realistic portrayal of Black life. And that is the drive and the impetus for making this film Killer of Sheep. He wanted to present something more genuine and real as the Black experience versus these caricatured expressions of what it meant to be Black in America that you often see in Black exploitation films. Those films have their place, and I like some of those films, like Shaft, which is a 4K from Criterion. But this is a film, Killer of Sheep, that presents a more genuine, realistic portrayal of life for this African American community in Watts, Los Angeles in the early 1970s. So it rejects Hollywood stereotypes and Black exploitation, and it's been selected for the National Film Registry. Now, Killer of Sheep is not just a film, it's a time capsule. Charles Burnett shot it on weekends over several years with non-professional actors, capturing life in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles in the early 1970s. Rather than chase Hollywood stereotypes or the glossy, revenge-driven thrills of Black exploitation, Burnett wanted to faithfully portray Black life with dignity and nuance. What you see on screen is a genuine, ground-level representation of a community rarely depicted authentically at that time. Families doing their best, children playing in vacant lots, a man worn down by his factory job but still trying to provide. It's a film about everyday survival and small joys, rich with humanity and empathy. It's no wonder Killer of Sheep was selected for the National Film Registry and often discussed in film schools as a landmark of independent cinema. Criterion's decision to include it in the collection and now to release it on 4K is a testament to their commitment to expanding the tent of film history, highlighting voices from different cultures and corners of the world that deserve to be preserved and celebrated. So, very excited about that. So let's talk a little bit about the director, Charles Burnett. He was part of the LA Rebellion movement, UCLA-trained filmmaker, dedicated to authentic human stories and influenced generations of indie filmmakers. So Charles Burnett is a legendary filmmaker that I am appreciating more and more the more I learn about him. And that's the beauty of releases like this from the Criterion Collection. It's like film school in a box. You know, you're learning more about these different filmmakers from around the world, filmmakers who have helped to build the history of cinema. Charles Burnett is one of those voices from the 1970s, and this is a wonderful package that celebrates his work and really helps you better understand his role in the history of cinema. So great stuff there about Charles Burnett. I mean, as a director, you know, he crafted Killer of Sheep as part of the LA Rebellion movement, which the LA Rebellion movement was a wave of Black filmmakers in the 70s, creating work that rejected Hollywood's cliches. Burnett's influence on later filmmakers is immense, even if his name isn't widely known. A lot of people haven't heard of Charles Burnett, and I certainly hadn't heard of him until very recently. And that is, you know, I don't think I feel ashamed for that. It just is what it is, right? We're all on a journey learning more about films and movies. And as we do that, we're not only experiencing the movies, but we're getting a behind the scenes peek at the filmmakers, those behind the camera who are responsible for these great pieces of work, and understanding why they're creating these works of art, what motivated them, and why these pieces of art are important in the history of cinema. So it's all part of a learning journey. So that's good stuff. But Burnett's, influence is immense, as I mentioned, and this film is often cited alongside works like The Bicycle Thieves for its neo-realist style and focus on working class struggles. So that is great. You see here the LA Rebellion movement, which was from 1967 to 1989. Some of the key filmmakers during this period were, of course, Charles Burnett, who was known for his landmark film Killer of Sheep, but you have Julie Dash, Hale Gerima, Jama Fanaka, Billy Woodbury, and other notable filmmakers like Barbara McCullough, Larry Clark, and on and on. You'll see here a couple of stills from Julie Dash's film Daughters of the Dust and Child of Resistance from 1972. So really, really good stuff. It's a movement that is a part of the texture of film history. So let's talk a little bit about the performances in this film, because I think the performances in this film are a big part of what gives this film such incredible character. You had Henry Gale Sanders as Stan. Stan is a beautifully understated performance as a man quietly crushed by the weight of his job and responsibilities. You saw in the previous slide where I was talking about the film, at the top left there, you saw that Stan is working in this factory, this slaughterhouse, if you would. The film is called Killer of Sheep, and Stan works in this slaughterhouse where they're basically slaughtering sheep for their fur and for the meat. And it's kind of a gruesome job, but hey, he has to take care of his family, and somebody has to do that work, right? So Henry Gale Sanders stars as Stan. You have Casey Moore is Stan's wife in this movie. Just a beautiful, beautiful representation as his wife. Non-professional cast adds a lot of realism. So in this film, as I mentioned before, Charles Burnett filmed this as part of his work as a student at UCLA in the early 1970s, and he used a lot of people from the neighborhood that he knew as extras who were non-professional, not professionally trained as actors. And that's part of what gave this film such a genuine feel to it and just a real, like, lived in feel, because these people weren't actors. They were literally being who they are, so to speak. And it's almost, in a way, it's almost like cinema verite, but not quite. It's more neo-realist in its style, but just very fascinating stuff. Everyday moments over Hollywood tropes is a big part of the performances of these characters. So great stuff there all the way around. So overall, I really enjoyed revisiting this film, Killer of Sheep, that is now on this fantastic Criterion Collection 4K edition. The first time I watched this film, and I'll share the circumstances that led to my first encounter with this film, I didn't really enjoy it as much, but I still had an appreciation for it from a historical standpoint. This time around, I had not only a greater appreciation, but I actually enjoyed the experience of watching this film even more. And this is a title that I'm growing in appreciation and enjoyment for the more times I come back to it. And I definitely wanted to come on here and share thoughts on it because I do think this is an important film that one should consider from a historical standpoint. And just, if you're into Criterion, likely you're open to different types of film experiences, independent cinema. So definitely want you to know about this one for sure. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how Killer of Sheep looks on 4K Ultra HD. This was a film that was shot 16 millimeter in the early 1970s by Charles Burnett, 1972, 1973 timeframe, shot on 16 millimeter. And I'll read a little bit from the insert here that talks about the master. You'll see here about the master. Criterion does include that for each release. And it says Killer of Sheep is presented in the aspect ratio of 1:33:1. Approved by director Charles Burnett, this new 4K restoration was created from a 16 millimeter preservation fine grain master positive made from the 16 millimeter original camera negative. The audio restoration and mix were done by John Polito at Audio Mechanics and Larry Blake. Now, at the time that this restoration was done, they did it at a good time because the 16 millimeter elements were aging and were going through a process of deterioration. So it was very important for them to get to these elements and do the restoration and do a new digital restoration. Basically get this into a digital space, do the restoration, and the results of the restoration are fantastic. This film looks great on the 4K format. This is a black and white film. And I mean, there's no Dolby Vision or HDR treatment applied, but the restoration work on this film was a huge success in my opinion. This film looks beautiful on the 4K format. It's a great example of black and white films being beautifully restored. You really get a nice look at the grayscale, and the dynamic range is presented very beautifully in terms of the gradients of blacks to whites, grays along the way. Just looks fantastic. A lot of great detail. Some of the shots are actually pretty stunning. Like when you see shots of Casey Moore and you see her face and you see like her hair and not only her, but just all the characters. A lot of the close-ups are actually pretty stunning looking in terms of the levels of detail and the richness in the image. And I just think this black and white image just comes across absolutely stunning on this 4K disc. It is a beautiful restoration of this classic example of American independent cinema from the 1970s. So I think it looks great. I mean, from a detail standpoint, depth, clarity, the image has been beautifully cleaned up. Just a beautiful restoration from the Criterion collection. The audio, again, is an uncompressed binaural soundtrack. The audio is perfectly fine, it's serviceable. It's not gonna be the type of audio that's gonna give your sound system a workout. It's not that type of an audio track. But you hear the dialogue, you hear the sounds in the soundscape. It is a very serviceable, perfectly fine audio track. It's been cleaned up very nicely, and you can hear the dialogue and hear the sound and the soundscape very, very well. So I think the presentation of this black and white film shot in the early 1970s on 16 millimeter has been restored beautifully. And it's a beautiful presentation of an all-time landmark in American independent cinema. So bravo to Criterion and everyone involved in that work. So the presentation, if you're a fan of this film, if you like classic films being restored in a beautiful format and presented in a way that modern audiences can really appreciate, and just preserving that piece of art, you're going to enjoy this presentation of Killer of Sheep. So high marks on that. Now, as far as the overall edition and the supplements, let's throw up this slide right here. You have here, of course, I talked about the new 4K restoration, crisp detail, rich contrast. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous. The supplements are fantastic on this edition, folks. The supplements are part of the reason that this is among my favorite releases of the year so far. And I'll do a video talking about my top 5 Criterion Collection releases of the year so far and whether or not this one is included in that. This one is definitely in the consideration of that. That's how good of an edition this is when you look at the presentation of the film, the actual movie itself, and the supplements. The supplements are excellent. They include interviews and historical context. You'll see at the top left there, Henry Gale Sanders. He played Stan in the movie. He talks a lot about his experiences as an actor and taking this role and working with Charles Burnett. You'll see Sanders was also in Ava DuVernay's film Selma, that came out a few years ago. Ava DuVernay and Charles Burnett are pictured in the center top there. Burnett was an influence and mentor for Ava DuVernay. So she was greatly influenced by Charles Burnett. And it's an interesting story about Sanders appearing in DuVernay's film that at first Ava DuVernay did not know who Henry Sanders was. She didn't have the connection of, oh, he was in Charles Burnett's film Killer of Sheep. She didn't make that connection until after they started filming the film, which is interesting. And then you see there's a great feature with Charles Burnett where he is talking about his experience creating this movie, wanting to go in a different direction than the typical stereotypes that were presented of Black families at the time that Hollywood was portraying them in these blaxploitation films. He wanted to present something more realistic, and I think he did a great job. But this edition overall, folks, is absolutely wonderful. You have an audio commentary featuring Burnett and film scholar Richard Pena. So wonderful audio commentary. You have the interviews with Burnett and actor Henry Gale Sanders. Fantastic. You also have a couple of great appreciations. One with Barry Jenkins. And then you have some short films. Several Friends, The Horse, which is an interesting short film. And then you have an excerpt from the 2010 UCLA LA Rebellion Oral History Project featuring an interview with Burnett by film scholar Jacqueline Stewart. A Walk with Charles Burnett, which is a documentary by Robert Townsend. So you have Robert Townsend and Charles Burnett walking around and talking about filmmaking and the experiences of making this film and just life in general. But just a wonderful discussion with Robert Townsend and a wonderful feature with Barry Jenkins is a great appreciation of Charles Burnett's work. So there is some fantastic content on this Blu-ray disc. Now, let me open this up to show you the inside of this edition. So here's the inside. You get your 4K disc, which has the movie and the commentary. And then the Blu-ray has the movie, the commentary, and the supplements. So some fantastic supplements on this Blu-ray disc. Of course, you have this nice insert here, which has a great essay called Everyday Blues by Danielle Amir Jackson, which does a great job of talking about the portrayal of children in this film and in that whole neo-realistic portrayal of Black life in Watts in the 1970s. The portrayal of children are a big part of this film, and this person talks about that. This is by Danielle Amir Jackson. So she talks about that. There are some wonderful pictures here. I'll show you the actual collage of pictures. You have Henry Gale Sanders and Casey Moore. You just have some wonderful, wonderful pictures here. But yeah, the features include Henry Gale Sanders. It also includes an archival interview and feature that shows Casey Moore. Of course, Casey Moore passed away a few years ago, so she's no longer with us. But it's interesting seeing her meeting Henry Gale Sanders and some others in a restaurant, and it's basically part of the cast reunion. And she was a very animated character, and they talk about her experiences on the set, that she was a very strong personality, and I thought that was very, very awesome. So the supplements are fantastic, and I think overall this is a very good addition from the Criterion Collection that you ought to consider adding to your cart. It is highly recommended. If you like independent cinema, if you want to experience something a little bit different than your typical like mainstream type release, and you just want to learn a little bit more about film history and learn about some of the luminaries who contributed to American cinematic history, this is a great example of that. So highly recommended. Now, as I mentioned before, this was my second time watching Killer of Sheep. My first time watching Killer of Sheep, I was introduced to this by a fellow YouTuber of mine that I want to let you know about, Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. So definitely check out his channel and check out my appearance on Robert Bellissimo's channel talking about Killer of Sheep from January 2024. So Robert had reached out to me and said, hey, I would love to have you on the channel and do a discussion of this film called Killer of Sheep. I had never heard of it before, and Robert sent me a link to it, a stream link, and I watched it, and I appeared on his channel and did a talk about it. And at the time, it was a film that I appreciated, but didn't really, my appreciation wasn't what it is today. But I definitely have a greater appreciation for it now. But I really enjoyed that talk with Robert Bellissimo. Check it out on his channel. I'll put a link to his channel and to this talk into that talk in the description of this video. But definitely check out his channel. He does some fantastic discussions of films. And he actually had a series where he did a series of LA Rebellion movie reviews, and one of those was a discussion with me on Killer of Sheep. So I definitely enjoyed that. And Robert also had a chance to meet the director Charles Burnett. So you see that video there on the channel. Check all of that out. Links are in the description below. But yeah, thank you to Robert for introducing me to this film. So when this film was announced, it was coming out on Criterion 4K, I knew I had to revisit it. I knew there was something special about this film, that I needed to revisit it, and I'm glad that I did on this new 4K edition, because it's a great example of the supplements can really give you a greater appreciation for the history of this film and this film's place in cinema history and why it's important. Why is Criterion putting it out? Who is this filmmaker? What is he about? What's his background? That's what you get going through the supplements, and I really, really enjoyed it. So this is what the front and the back of the case look like. Again, this is the inside here, and it is just a phenomenal package from the Criterion Collection all the way around. One of my favorites of the year so far, and I'm excited that I had a chance to share some thoughts with you today. So let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about this film, Killer of Sheep? Have you seen it? If so, let us know what you think about it in the comment section below. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time at the movies. Have a great one. Peace.